I think the most interesting story around Dragon Age the Veilguard isn't the game itself, but everything surrounding the game. Whether intentional or unintentional, Dragon Age has put itself front and center in a culture war that has been raging all throughout 2024. And as this year winds down, all eyes look to this game to see if gamers are true to their word and will boycott it, or if marketing can push this game into profitability. The rule has always been with gaming, if the game is good, people will want to play it. And one aspect that has seen the Gamergate 2.0 movement so successful is that the games being boycotted haven't really been that good. Now for me, I never planned on picking up Dragon Age in the first place, so I never felt like there was anything for me to actually be upset about with everything that they've shown with this game so far. So here we are on the eve of its release, and the reviews are unsurprisingly mixed. Legacy Media seems to be very positive on the game, and this brings into question, do these reviews still carry weight, as the content creators seem to highlight that the game isn't that good, with them saying it's been a disappointment and that they do not recommend the game. Legendary Drops tweets this out and he says, "This Dragon Age the Veilguard situation is the most mask-off attempt at scamming an audience I've ever seen. Legacy Media is throating it, while historically positive creators and players are saying it's a dumpster fire. You absolute morons, you thought it would work." And that's why I wanted to say that this is the most interesting story surrounding the game to date. Because if the game sells well and people love it, all the Gamergate 2.0 movement had done is actually just promote the game for free. However, if the game sells well and people regret buying the game, you're going to see the power continue to shift more and more to the right. Not out of principle, but out of pure frustration, because the game doesn't shy away from injecting modern politics into an established fantasy world. Now, what Legendary Drops is alluding to and what Grums is highlighting with the various different astroturfing articles highlighting how good the game is versus what other content creators are saying really is an interesting point. Now let's focus in on what John says in this case. He says, "So 5 years ago when I first rejoined the project as narrative director after a hiatus on Anthem, I was asked my goals for the project. And one of the ones that I put was, I want to see the phrase, a triumphant return to form for BioWare in at least one review. Excited to finally mark that goal." And he goes on, "This project has been both the greatest privilege and the hardest dev cycle of my career. To say I am proud of this team would be an understatement, and to say I'm thrilled with the reviews would be similar." And gamers have noticed with Skooma tweeting out, "Never trust game journalists," with them all repeating the phrase return to form, and even Pure Xbox using the phrase a triumphant return to form. Now this is where we have to look at the conversation in deep dive. So Grums is tweeting this out. We're going to highlight this tweet and talk about what is happening right now, and we can follow this up with a future video if you guys are interested. But he says companies used to have control over the narrative of their products, much more control than they have now with the advent of YouTube and social media. We're seeing some very heavy-handed techniques being employed with AstroTurf to control the message around Dragon Age Veilguard. Review copies are being withheld, obvious marketing messages being enforced with all media like parrots, and possibly more than we have yet to discover. There's a lot of money at stake here, and EA does not want to have the game have a sales disaster, and gamers are misled into thinking this is a 10 out of 10 game, and so far it's working. Now what he's talking about here is that if we just look at the Steam store data, it is now the top 5 sellers on the platform, number 25 in wish lists, and followers is just under 75,000. Now we're going to put these numbers into context here, because as we look at how these games is sold, and we got the PC numbers here, overall this is going to be the total numbers as well as what it actually looked like and translated on PC, because we have that ability to do that. Dragon Age originally sold, the Origins, through more than 3.2 million copies had been sold, which translates on the PC Steam side of things roughly to a all-time peak of 2,634. Now there's a lot of reasons for that, because when it's all said and done, we've seen a bigger shift into PC gaming. I know that EA had their kind of launcher for the longest time, and they've slowly been coming back to Steam, but it's interesting to see those numbers regardless. Dragon Age 2 sold just over 2 million copies at an all-time peak on Steam with 1,410. So a little bit of a dip. Dragon Age 2 historically has not been the well-received or the best reviewed version of the game. But all that changed with Dragon Age Inquisition, which the game sold over 12 million copies, and with an all-time peak on Steam with just under 5,000. So I don't know if necessarily if we're if this is something to be marked as working. Time will tell here in the next couple of days, especially going into the weekend. We will have some bigger numbers to report, and we'll be sure to cover that with a future state of the game, because I think that will be something exciting to see. But Grums goes on and he says, the Dragon Age as number 3 is on the Steam sales charts. Huge swath of gamers are being misled. We know the political propaganda in the game is over the top. We know that the combat is awful, and we know that the game is filled with terrible writing. But most gamers don't, and they aren't on X, and what they see on YouTube and on gaming websites is being tightly controlled. But this is a trick that only works once. Once gamers see how bad the game is compared to where they were told, many more will be red-pilled. Traditionally, Dragon Age fans are going to be very split, and many are going to be very angry. This will bite EA in the ass the next time, and journalists and many YouTubers are about to have their credibility trashed. Gamers burned by this will remember the next time BioWare or EA tries to sell a game to them. I've always said the Dragon Age brand was too big to fail, and before Wokey say, but you said it was the end of BioWare. Please learn what a headline quote is versus my actual prediction. But I still expect the game to underperform in the long term, even with its unprecedented PR assault by EA.
After the previews came out, I think it became very apparent that most of the people who were still interested in Veilguard after watching the previews were waiting for reviews to make their final decision about whether or not to purchase the game. If you just read comments in any YouTube video about the Veilguard or look at the poll on our community page, you can see that the vast majority of people that are still interested are waiting for reviews. Looking at this, EA's marketing team probably saw this and decided that they needed to make the reviews as positive as possible, trying to exclude those that might, give the game a 7 or an 8, while also reaching out and finding press and content creators that would maybe give the game a 9 or above. Just think about this for a second. If you're on the EA end and you're trying to manipulate review scores because you want high review scores, what are you going to do? You're going to research press and content creators and what they usually give to games score-wise to give you a general idea of how they're going to review your game. For us, we never give games 10s. 9s are extremely rare. Most games we give reviews to fall somewhere in the 7 or 8 range, while other places, you know who they are, always give 9s and 10s, and frankly, it's hard to take them seriously. And this is why I made this video. Because you guys told us in no uncertain terms that you're waiting for reviews, and you're about to get a bunch of reviews that have been curated by the publisher for their likelihood of being extremely positive in an attempt to manipulate your view of Dragon Age the Veilguard. They want you to think there is a universal consensus that the game is amazing, thereby convincing you that you should try it, but also influencing future review scores, as it's difficult to be the outlier. If you've ever done a review for a game or for something, you'll realize that if you're the only one giving a high review score when everyone else is giving it a low review score, it's difficult. Or if you're the only one giving it a low review score and everyone else is giving it a high review score, it's a very difficult position to be in. So if you see a bunch of positive review scores come out today, think about all the people that are going to be playing afterward and how much pressure they're going to feel to give the game a slightly better score than they would have given it, just to avoid maybe some undue pressure. And sometimes that doesn't even happen consciously, it's just done subconsciously.
In the video game industry, there is a serious lack of integrity problem. I continually see many cases of this happening. And what I would say is, if we were going to take anything positive, anything good from this moment, is that it could be a waking up moment, a real realization moment for a lot of gamers in terms of what these companies are. This access media is a huge push to getting favorable coverage out there in the open. Now, it's interesting, they also brought up two things. They talked about the consensus. I've seen people argue that truth is defined by consensus, and that's not the case. But he goes on to then talk about just the influence of several positive reviews already being out there and not wanting to be the person who kind of just, spits on the fire, who pisses on the party, like who essentially is throwing that cold water on everyone. And I get that aspect, but each to their own. Like they're all going to have to, kind of look at themselves in the mirror at that point. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what shakes out of this tree when it's all said and done, because there's other factors at play. So when it's all said and done, the development costs right now are being estimated around 80 to 150 million. If it is in that ballpark, it is fairly reasonable that they can actually make a profit on it, not assuming or not calculating for their marketing budget. So if development was 150, the general rule of thumb has been to spend another 150 on marketing the game to push sales. But that is where things have changed over the long run. We'll be keeping an eye on it. I would go out to say, like, I fully expect that we might see articles stating like, hey, it underperformed. Like maybe it does hit profitability, but in terms of what they're projecting or what they hope that they can sell the game, time will, be the judge here. I don't really care personally how you spend your money. I don't care how you spend your time. But what I do actually care about is you. And right now the world feels crazy. And that's why I always like to wrap up my videos with what I call a message of hope. I feel like everyone here in the US specifically, tensions are obviously high, emotions are very high, people are on edge, and social media does a lot to highlight those emotions because they're easily shareable. So I want to talk to you guys today about two circles to really hopefully help give you a little bit more calm in your life next week and beyond. And those two circles are the circle of interest versus the circle of influence. Now, what do these have to do with you? I think for me specifically, I have a lot of interests. I cover a handful of them here in terms of video games, but beyond video games, I have a deep interest in studying philosophy and theology, and I love having, a spirited and, I guess good faith debates, right? But I have no control over that. I don't have any control over how people receive my words. I don't have any control, and you have no control in your circle of interests. They're just interests. The power that you actually have is in the circle of influence, and the goal is to actually understand the difference between the two and where you fall. Are you in an area of your interest, or are you in an area of your influence? Do you have any real agency, any real control? Now, I'll say this time and time again. The only thing we really can control in this life is really how we react to the things that come our way. It's perfectly fine to have things in the circle of interest. It's perfectly fine to spend time there. But what I see a lot of people, what leaves a lot of frustration, especially in the age of social media, is that people feel like the circle of interest should respond to them. And it really doesn't. It doesn't even really know that we're there half the time. The circle of influence is who in your life do you actually have influence with? Both yourself in terms of self-control, but also for those, your friends, your family around you. And so that's where ultimately I think you'll find more productive use of your time and less frustration in the long run. Now, that being said, with these two circles, there's a couple of practical tips that I want to give you and send you on the way, especially if you're new around here. I suffer from seasonal depression. It is something that kicks up every now and then. I have combated it with exercise and vitamin D. Those are two things that have helped me out dramatically, just throughout this year. And it just is something that I know about myself. And if you end up finding that, if you find that you have that as well, that could be something good for you. But the other things that we can do is just sometimes it's the simplest things that we put off when we waste so much processing time in our brains, constantly reminded that we need to do this thing that we just either don't have time for, we don't have the energy for, we don't have the interest in doing at the moment, and we kind of push these things off. A couple of key things are brushing your teeth, making your bed, and especially taking a shower. Set yourself some very achievable goals in your day. Today, like make a say, hey, like, you know what, I'm going to do something that I haven't done or I've been putting off, and you just go do it rather than let it fester. Because every time you walk into your bedroom and your bed's not made and you're thinking, man, I should have made it, you'll actually find that if you have your bed made and you walk into your room, there's a little bit more peace, a little bit more calmness that you actually get. And especially with the world and the life and things like that, we all need a little bit more peace and a little bit more joy in our lives. And it's interesting how the things we own can try to actually own us. And so decluttering is also another really good tip. If you struggle with ADHD, body doubling is a really good tip, especially if you struggle with that last mile, finishing off something, getting it done, getting it over the finish line. There are hacks, you know, in our lives that we can do. And sometimes it's just being made aware that this one little thing might not consciously be bugging you, but it could be plaguing your subconscious, leading to negative and other effects down the road. Anyway, guys, that's it for this video. God bless you. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you enjoyed, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. But until then, take care.